Well, welcome. My name is Mr. Murphy, and I just want to take a minute to introduce myself and talk a little bit about what you can expect for this year. Now, this year I teach both pre-calculus and Algebra 2, and pretty much the same information applies to both. So whether you're in pre-calculus or Algebra 2, this video will apply to both of you. I'm also, in addition to being to teaching those two classes, I'm also the math department lead. So that requires me to be in a lot of meetings, which will impact my office hours, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. So a little bit more about myself. First off, I have a wife and family. In fact, here's a picture of my family. My wife, Katie, we've been married for 21 years now. And just to the right of my wife is my daughter, Abigail, in the purple, and she is 16. And to her right is Eliana. She's the one wearing white, and she just turned 14. And then Lydia is in between the two of them, and she's 11. And then right next to me and my wife Katie is Briella, our youngest, who is 9 years old. So that's my family. And yes, I am a father of 4 girls. I consider myself blessed that way. I love having daughters, and they're a lot of fun. So a little bit more about myself. This is my 25th year of teaching. I have not spent all these years in Edina. This is actually my 13th year in Edina High School. I spent a couple of years previous in different alternative schools working with at-risk students. I have my master's degree in curriculum instruction, and beyond that, I have a bunch of credits and other certification dealing with technology and education. Now, as far as what your student needs for this year, now, it doesn't matter, again, if they're in Algebra 2 or pre-calculus, it's going to look the same. Now, some of the main things you're going to need is you're going to need a notebook, obviously, just for taking notes and being organized. You need to have a TI-84 calculator. Both classes will be using the TI-84 a lot. And so if you're in Algebra 2, it's worth the investment. I would suggest paying the extra little bit of cash and get the version that's a color screen. I think it's like maybe $15, $20 more. But when we do multiple graphs and things, it does make a difference as far as being able to see those different graphs in color and knowing which one's which. But if you don't have the color version, it's not the end of the world. But you definitely do want to take and make the investment in getting a TI-84 calculator. It's going to be a calculator that they're going to be using every year after this. So you're going to get your money's worth in the long run. In addition to the TI-84 calculator, you also want to have a scientific calculator. Now, I recommend the one that I have here on the screen. If you notice, it's the TI-30X2S. Last time I looked on Amazon, they were on sale for only like $10, regularly $20. And so if you're seeing this now, hopefully you can get on there and maybe they're still on sale. But that is something that you want to use, want to get access to. Again, you're going to use this all throughout because there's going to be different times in the year where maybe, especially for assessment purposes, where we use the graphing calculator to investigate, study, look at graphs, be able to make comparison and contrasting statements and be able to look at that information. But then when it comes to time for a test, we want you to remember that information and not so much have access to the graph. And so there are going to be times where when we go to test, where either part of the test or the entire test, you cannot use a graphing calculator, but you can use a scientific calculator. So that's why it's really necessary to also buy or have access to one of these scientific calculators if you don't have one already. And if it's not the one, if you have a scientific calculator and it's not the one that I have here, it's not a big deal. As far as what you want is you want to be able to have the trig functions, sine, cosine, tangent, and exponents, and that's about it. As long as it doesn't have the graphing features is what we're trying to avoid with that. Some optional items now you'll notice on Schoology is I'll have access to all my PowerPoints. Some students like to print those out ahead of time, so that way you just kind of follow along with the PowerPoint by adding in the information or adding in the, doing the work for the equation. It's up to you. So if you want to have that, you can. Otherwise, if you want to take notes, I try to make sure that when I'm doing notes in class, that I highlight or underline or say this is something that you want to get down in your notebook. So in that way, if you don't have those notes printed out, you know exactly what to write down. You're not trying to frantically write down everything on the screen, because oftentimes I have stuff on the screen that's important to know, but not necessarily important to have in your notes. So you could have my notes printed out or use a notebook. And then a 3-ring binder is just nice and handy, just to be able to keep all the information, all the stuff organized. As far as a grading scale, 20% of your grade will be based on formative assessments. That'll be like quizzes, maybe homework checks. 80% of the grade will be based on your summative tests, and that includes the final. And this is your grading scale. So it's basically just a standard grading scale. So the 90, 80, 70, 60 are the different cutoffs. Now you might be wondering what that second column, why that's grayed out, and you'll see why in just a minute here. And that deals with our retake policy. So if you ever get a 75% or less on a summative assessment, so a test, not a quiz. So if you get 75% or less on a test, you will have the option to retake it. Now, I don't do extra credit. Okay, so at the end of the semester, oftentimes I'll have students say, what can I do to get my grade up? And I'll look back and I'll say, well, you could have retaken a bunch of these tests and that would have gotten your grade, if not what you're looking at or hoping to get, if not better, had you retaken those tests. So again, it only applies for students that get less than a 75% or 75% or less, and you can retake it up to a 75%. And so let's say you have a bad day and you really were struggling with the concept, you got a 45% on a test, and you come in, you meet with me or you meet with the tutor, you do the homework that you had skipped, and you come in, you retake it, and let's say on the second try you get an 85%. Well, what I would do is in Schoology, in the grading comments, I would say that I would write down what the original score was a 45%, the retake was an 85%, but the maximum grade change is a 75%. And then in the grade book, you would see the 75. But at least for you and your parents to be able to see that, hey, I really did well, I did understand the concept better than a 75, I got an 85% on the retake, but out of fairness for those that aren't allowed to retake it, we only change the grade up to a 75%. But obviously the goal is to do better than 75% on the first try, so in that way you don't have to worry about falling in that category of doing a retake. Because what we want to avoid is people getting stuck in the cycle, because that does happen where students get stuck in the cycle where maybe the first test, they just winging it, don't do much of the work, they do poorly, they have to retake it. So now all of a sudden, when we go to start the next chapter, they're redoing all the old assignments from the first chapter, plus they have all these new assignments for the second chapter, and you can see that you can very easily get stuck in a cycle. So we want to try to avoid that as much as possible, and you can do that by just staying on top of the work and paying attention in class. But in order to retake it, then what I ask students to do is they have to show me that they've completed their assignments and have met with me, because then what oftentimes will happen is just by doing the assignments, students like, hey, I figured it out. We sit down, we go over the test, I give them some practice problems, and they're able to show me that, hey, I'm ready to knock this out of the park. Then on a different day, we retake the test, and they do fine. But if students like rush it and like, I don't have time to meet with you, and they retake it, oftentimes students don't do that well because they haven't been able to check in with me and I haven't been able to check in with them to make sure that they really understood the concept. So that piece, that element is very, very important, is meeting with me so we can sit down and go over the test. Now, the deal is you want to make sure that the retake must be done. This is a school policy. It must be done before the next test takes place. So we usually take tests about every 2.5 weeks. So that gives you a good window to be able to do what's necessary in order to retake it. But after that next test takes place, that previous retake is done and we're moving forward. So if you have any questions, this is my email. My email is the best way to contact me, because throughout the day, I am either not at my phone or I'm teaching, so trying to call me is not always the best. Emailing me is the best, and then I can either respond in email, or if I think it'd be easier to respond by phone call, I can do that at the end of the day. My office hours is in my classroom, E345. Now, I don't do mornings. Okay, so we have, being the area leader, oftentimes I'll have meetings in the morning. I'll have area leader meetings, department meetings, school-based meetings. So a lot of meetings oftentimes end up taking up a lot of my mornings. And so I'd hate to say, hey, these are my office hours, then always having to change them and it gets confusing for students. I very rarely have any meetings in the afternoon. So I make my office hours available in the afternoon from after school to 4 o'clock, Monday through Thursday. Now, if there is a time where maybe you or your child would like to meet with me in the morning, all I ask is you shoot me an email and I'll see if I'm available. If I am available, I'll try to make it work. Otherwise, if I'm not available, we'll try to make arrangements maybe for a different morning that week. So anyways, that's a little bit about myself. I'm looking forward to this year, and I hope you are as well. And I'm hoping for all of us, it's going to be a great and productive year. See you soon.